Do you still believe politics is the right vehicle to change the world?
It's one of them, definitely. And I guess I wouldn't get up in the morning and jump out of bed and run into work if I didn't have that sense that certainly I'm engaged in doing some good, bending the world towards something that I think it ought to be.
And did you go into this because you wanted to change the world and make the world a better place?
I think that the starting point for me was working out fairly young that I didn't want the kind of life my parents had. By that, I mean stressful, hard, sometimes brutal. I was aware round about 11, 12 of the juxtaposition of the kind of life I had growing up in Tottenham and then what I saw when I left Tottenham age 11 and went to Peterborough on a choral scholarship to school there. And I saw a slightly different kind of Britain. And it made me think about the concrete, the inner city context back home. And I got a sense of unfairness. That grew through the 80s. People like Nelson Mandela and some of the issues, Margaret Thatcher, riots, that's those sorts of issues. And so that led me to the political. And even though I started off a lawyer, I was the kind of lawyer that kept coming back to why is this guy in the police cell? Why has this small business gone bankrupt? What's the overall envelope into which this person or these people find themselves? And that gets you very much into policy and politics.
I mean, right now, as we record this, Theresa May has just done an agreement with the European Union about Brexit, which may or may not get thrown out by the House of Commons in a couple of weeks. Do you feel politics is broken right now, or is it still working?
I feel like I'm living in a parallel universe. I could never, ever have predicted the situation that this country is in. And I am a actor in that story because obviously I'm a parliamentarian. I'm pretty prominent on one side of the debate. I say I could never have predicted it because I think that generally speaking, Britain is quite a predictable country, evolutionary, not revolutionary. On it, presents itself reasonably well to the rest of the world relative to other countries. I don't think we're doing that at this time. And because I have a deep sense of gloom, really, about a post-Brexit Britain. Now, some of that is wrapped up, frankly, in my race and ethnicity and the kind of people I represent, because people like Nigel Farage, Jacobs Rees-Mogg and others are on one side of this debate, and I really don't think that they have the interests of ethnic minorities at the centre of their thinking. So I'm a bit biased, but also I think economically it just can't be good for my constituents in the short term. So yeah, we're in a place that I could never, ever have predicted. And I guess when I'm certainly contributing to this debate, in my mind's eye, I'm often thinking of my children and the kind of England they might grow up in if this terrible, terrible decision is not reversed.
But doesn't this illustrate the extent to which politics isn't working right now, and that nobody knows what the hell's going on, nobody knows what's going to happen, whether Brexit's going to go ahead or not, what kind of Brexit it's going to be? And, I mean, there is total confusion. You know, there's a mixture of total boredom, total gloom, total confusion, and we're heading for the cliff edge in a couple
That's
of
right.
months.
But I suppose what sits behind the Brexit story in Britain are bigger stories, aren't there? They're stories of gross inequality. They're stories around the crash of 2008 and where that left significant parts of the country, particularly the country beyond London. It's a story of the loss of empire, I think, and status. I'm really relaxed with pooling sovereignty with European countries. I can't get animated about sharing sovereignty at all. And I'm trying to listen hard to a group of people in the country who would put that above economy. I don't recognise this Britain in which there aren't immigrants who want to come, particularly younger immigrants, contribute with their taxes to an ageing population, do jobs that quite a lot of Brits don't want to do in care homes, picking fruit, quite hard work. I can't reconcile that to folk who say, well, those are our jobs. I'm not sure those people want to do those jobs. And then, of course, we've got populism and a bunch of politicians striking what can be popular poses in public life, lying often actually, and saying very reactionary things. So that's the combination. That's what Brexit means to me, really. And that means that that this country is, might I just say, I don't think so much that this is a disease of Britain. I think that this is an English problem. I think the Scots kind of know who they are. And so do the Welsh, actually, and certainly the Irish. It's something to do with England's unease with itself. And so England is contested. And I find myself on one end of that debate, fighting bloody hard for the England I want my children to grow up in.
I mean, you mentioned your childhood and the importance of your parents not wanting the struggle that your parents had. I mean, just tell us about that. When did your parents come here? What did they come from and what did they arrive into?
My dad came here in 1956. My mother came later in the late 60s. She was my father's second wife. They came from Guyana, which was part of the old British Empire. They're at the top of the South America, next to Brazil and Venezuela, but the very Caribbean in feel. They were part of that Windrush generation that came to Britain after the war. Now, there's a lot of slightly trite stuff that's put out that gives the impression that these were just sort of economic immigrants that, you know, arrived to assist Britain in its hour of need after the Second World War. But it's a bit more complicated than that. The truth was they were young people in the Caribbean when it was struggling. The Caribbean, after the end of slavery and as empire wound down, had a lot of labour shortages. There was quite a lot of push and pull to those people who left the Caribbean. Things were not easy in the Caribbean. But they came with hope, particularly my father, who arrived here at 24, of building a new life. Not sure how long they would live here or would they go back. And obviously having grown up with a powerful sense of what being English was, because the empire was so real and the textbooks and teachers and all the rest of it that they would have had would have been very, very English, actually. So that was my parents, but they had a pretty tempestuous marriage. Life was not easy. My father fell into depression, alcoholism, bits of gambling, womanizing at the beginning of the 80s. He left when I was 12, and it was hard for my mother raising us. There are 5 of us in total.
Do you remember that young childhood, those struggles?
Very much so. Very much so.
What kind of impact do you think it had on you?
Well, I think there's a sort of anxious, uneasy anxiety. People call it anxiety now, that you get in the pit of your stomach, that I recall and I remember. The sort of tough stuff of parents who are rowing or screaming at each other, occasionally violence, the chaos and confusion of alcoholism, the fear of no money and the worry of no money, you know, the lights go out because the electricity bill doesn't get paid, the powerful sense of being different. I sometimes was quite conscious of teachers slightly patronizing my parents, sometimes slightly embarrassed because my parents' English was not, you know, as polished as my sort of, you know, as white middle class friends I certainly started to develop at secondary school. And also fear of the future. My overwhelming sense growing up was a powerful, powerful fear of ending up in prison. I used to have both waking and nightmares.
Why? Well, where did that come from?
It came from all the kids that were slightly older than me going to prison. After the Tottenham riots, a lot of people were rounded up and spent time in prison. There was a lot of kids getting in trouble with the police. One of my brothers was getting into trouble with the police a lot. So I had this fear of being imprisoned and of ruining my life. So there was quite a lot of stress, really. I mean, I think that's, when you think about people who get cancers or die and they say, oh, this is a bit stress related, that's how I feel about it. It's both my parents, by the way, died in their 60s. They were just stressed out.
Because you've talked since about the importance of fathers, and you effectively lost your father when he left. How did it affect you?
It left a big hole. There's the basic things, who's, learning how to knot a tie, how to shave, the birds and the bees. But it's also just sort of being different. I just constantly being embarrassed because, you had a single mum. And there was still in those days, some stigma attached to just having a single parent.
Well, a lot, wasn't there?
There was a lot.
Yeah.
There was a lot. There was
Not just some. I mean,
there was a lot.
Conservative politicians would openly talk about it.
There was a lot. There was a lot. And we were quite a Christian family, so it wasn't a good look. And then just a sense of loss. Dad had left in a weird way. He didn't sort of say, I'm leaving, slam the door and walk away. He was meant to be going off to America. A lot of West Indians, not well understood, but actually in the 80s moved on to the United States and Canada because actually life in Britain was not turning out quite like they'd hoped. And he had gone to America to look to see how things might be for us and was going to send for us. And so there was a sense in which we kept sort of expecting him to get in contact and send for us or communicate with us. And he just sort of quietly disappeared. Because
you seem to have sort of spent your life being as far away from that image of your father as possible. I mean, to go and be a choral scholar in a boarding school, age 12 on a scholarship, put you on a path that was going to set you way out, didn't it?
It did. I mean, I have to say, at the time, it wasn't always clear it was going to work out. I mean, I had teachers that were worried about sending me to an all-white school. I did experience racism at different points in that environment. I sometimes, didn't quite know how to handle myself and handle it and all the stuff that was going on back home when I came back home at the weekends particularly and in the holidays.
Whose idea was it to go to that school? I mean, how did that come about?
It was my music teacher, Mrs. Shepherd, a wonderful, wonderful woman who had a passion to teach in an inner city environment, inner city Tottenham, who taught me music, taught me singing and encouraged me alongside the local priest. Aled Jones had just got to #1 in the charts with Walking in the Air, so it was all the vogue at the time. And it was their idea. But yes, you're right. For sure, it set me in the end on a different path. I wasn't always sure of that path, and there's still a lot. I remember when I decided I wanted to become a barrister, I didn't know any barristers. How do you become a barrister? When I decided, I wouldn't mind getting into politics or being involved in, I didn't grow up delivering Labour leaflets. I didn't know anyone in the unions. I didn't know anyone in the Labour Party, really. Not the party, we voted Labour, we didn't know anyone.
But what I mean is, it's also sort of a reaction to what your parents are and what you've come from. You're proud of who they are, but you also want to be as different as possible.
So look, I would say to David Lammy, as he sits here approaching 47, is very proud of my West Indian Caribbean roots and what my parents gave me, but was absolutely clear. I didn't want the stress that was in their lives. I didn't want the poverty. I wanted to be comfortable. I wanted to be successful. I didn't want to be going to my school's parents' evening and feel that I was being patronised. I didn't want the confusion of not knowing how the system worked, and you've got all these forms to fill in for X or Y, and you're a bit confused or a bit worried. Absolutely, I didn't want any of that, and that was a big motivating force for me to succeed against the odds. Definitely.
Has politics played out the way you thought it would when you went into it?
No. No, it hasn't.
I mean, what did you think? Did you think you were going to be a cabinet minister or what? I mean,
I think the first thing to say is I was very political. I was very conscious of social justice. I was motivated. I joined anti-apartheid, nuclear disarmament before the Labour Party. I had a powerful sense of argument and sort of debate. But what I wasn't was very party political in the sense that I was never really immersed with the Labour. I was a Labour voter, but not immersed in the party. So I think when I got into Parliament, I was pretty naive about how it... I'd never been to Westminster, by the way. I'd never been when I took my seat. So I was pretty naive. Everyone thought that I was, at that time, there was this crop of young politicians that had come out of Oxbridge and basically worked for Thatcher, Lawson, Blair or Brown. I'm thinking of the Miliband's, I'm thinking of Alexander, Purnell, Cameron, Osborne, all of that. And I think people thought, because I was around the same age, that I was one of them, but I wasn't.
You did seem to be like them, though, and part of that movement, that new Labour movement.
Well, in a way, that becomes de facto because you're coming in at the same time as them, one, and two, because I suppose I could speak the Queen's English and knew how to wear a suit. But there were some other things going on as well. I also got some really bad advice. I mean, Tony Blair said to me very early on, "Look, David, you don't need to be pigeonholed. You should avoid race, and I'm not gonna put you into a job where you're kind of Mr. Spokesman.
Don't bang on about being black all the time.
For race relations, kind of thing." And so the first bit of my career, particularly because you're in government, you haven't got the brief. There was none of that. And I think that was a mistake. But sometimes say, "Oh, well, you became a minister very early on." Yeah, I did, but so have others. I would say also that I still had quite a lot. I had responsibilities in my wider extended family, and I found it quite tough. I've got to be honest. When you're a junior minister, particularly, getting the civil service to bend to what you desire, to perform for you is bloody. I mean, it's hard on the best of times, but I think, basically sitting in a room with a bunch of middle-class white mandarins, I did not find easy.
Did you find it hard to be taken seriously?
Yes.
Yes. And do you think there was racism in that?
Yes.
From just sort of senior Whitehall
types? I think there is stereotyping, discrimination, and sometimes serious racism that exists both within political parties. I'm not leaving the Labour Party out of this mix, and within the wider civil service. But having said that, I don't think if we were in government today and I would minister, it'd be quite the same, because my arsenal of my toolkit of skills and ability are more mature. So there's also a bit about maybe, actually, the truth is in politics, you can't be too nice and you simply can't be too arsed what people think of you.
Well, you're a different kind of politician now,
yes,
aren't you?
Probably.
I mean, and you're much more prepared to say what you think, to be passionate about things, to get angry. Do you think you were playing it too safe for the first half of your political career?
I think that people in their 20s and 30s often play it a bit safe. I'm not in a place in my life where I need to do that. I am comfortable financially between myself and my wife. I've got 3 wonderful children who are well sorted. I've been at this game now for almost 2 decades. I am no longer in a place where I need anyone. I don't need to crawl up the leader of the Labour Party's arse. I don't need to be on the front bench, frankly, to achieve shit. I've achieved quite a lot from where I'm sitting. I'm very keen to help the Labour Party if I can, and so if that call comes, then fine. But it has to be to some extent on my own terms. I'm not just being a yes person or filling a slot for somebody else. I'm in that American sense, what's fashionable now, I'm speaking my truth, and nothing's going to sway me off that. So in that sense, I'm not really calibrating what I say and who I offend, or the force with which I say things.
So does that mean you decided to try and make the world a better place by the force of what you say in your argument, rather than from within a machine of politics that becomes, that makes you a cabinet minister and gives you the power to change things?
I was never the most convincing tribal animal. To be honest, I don't know if I was very convincing. I've always been slightly suspicious of Trump. I mean, I suppose I was bullied when I was younger. I don't like opaque worlds where you can't quite see, there's a veneer put up, but you can't quite see the wheels within wheels. I also, look, I'm not I'm not speaking about everything in our national life. I mean, there's loads of things that people have no idea what my views are, because I am pretty disciplined about the things that I think I can make a contribution to. And that's the other thing about the UK Parliament. It likes specialists. It likes people who know what they're talking about when they stand up. And there's a whole load of things I don't tend to say very much about.
Why did you walk away from a front bench job with Ed Miliband?
I didn't, at the time, think that Ed was the one.
You just thought it was a waste of time, sort of joining that team?
I was sick of being... I was quite disillusioned in those last days of Gordon Brown. I lost my faith in Gordon Brown pretty early. We had a few rows, in fact. I'd been hugely inspired by Barack Obama in the United States. And I guess I just wasn't in a space in my life where I wanted to dance to somebody else's tune. I also had a hunch, a feeling that opposition was going to be really tough. Austerity was an idea at that point. It was not a reality. But I had a feeling that I would do a better job representing the interests of the people of Tottenham, liberated to say what I felt and wanted. And that turned out to be true. The first thing that happened, about a year into that, we had the riots. And that was probably an important breakout moment for me, where it was the first moment in my political career where I thought, my God, thank God I'm here at this time with this experience, able to speak a certain kind of truth, not just for my constituents, but genuinely, I think the country needs me to be saying what I'm saying. So, and I'm not sure that would have been as easy, hemmed in by collective responsibility.
What difference do you think it made that you were able to do that?
In the riots?
Yeah.
Well, in those early hours, the politicians were at sea. Many of them were on holiday. The rioting began to set in.
It was August, wasn't it?
It was August. The journalists, sometimes in August, the good journalists are on holiday. But the journalists were wanting to write up a story that was purely about race riots. And then the riots started spreading all over the country, and there were not black people rioting, right? There was like a bigger story. There was also a story about catastrophic police failure at that point to keep public order. So I think that the truth was, it required me to be there, to be in relationship with the family of Mark Duggan, who had lost his life following police contact, but absolutely to be very clear that burning down people's shops and their homes is unacceptable, to condemn it, and to assist where I could, and a lot of it was behind the scenes. Theresa May ringing me up as Home Secretary, David Cameron as Prime Minister, Ed Miliband as Leader of the Opposition, people like the Prince of Wales wanting to know what they could do, what they could say, what was really going on.
The next sort of moment that you really captured a national mood, I think, was Grenfell. I think we should hear a bit of it.
David Lammy, this enormous tragedy raises so many questions. For you, what is this about?
For me, this is about the welfare state. For your middle-class viewers, this is about whether the welfare state is just schools and hospitals, or whether it's about having a safety net. And I get quite emotional as I say that. We need to live in a society where we care for the poorest and the vulnerable. And that means housing. It means somewhere decent to live. It was a noble idea that we built. And it's falling apart around our eyes.
You did an interview with Jackie Long on the lawn of Westminster, which captured a moment because it put Grenfell in a much bigger context than where it had been seen by a lot of people up to that point, because you framed it as really the collapse of a nation, the collapse of the welfare state, and caring about the most vulnerable people, writ large in this terrible disaster. Where did that come from?
Well, the first thing to say is I'd done a few interviews that day, and in the morning, I had said very clearly when the question was put to me, what's this about, that I thought it was corporate manslaughter. It needed to be said because journalists and others needed to have license to actually begin to hold some of these people to account. And people have been pussyfooting around using that language. So that was the first thing that happened. And so it'd been a long day. Jackie, and she said to me, oh, come on, David, one more on the green. You've got great stuff to say. And I was quite tired by that point and a bit emotional. I went into autopilot for a few days, frankly. And the truth was, a friend had died, a young woman who worked with my wife called Khadija Say, who was a beautiful young woman who reminded me a lot of myself when I was her age, working class. She'd actually got a scholarship to rugby school, was pursuing her artistic career and was going to be incredible, and she died. And I don't know that. So I begun, I guess, to feel sort of grief coming to me. Anyway, Jackie interviewed me, and out it poured. It's the truth, it just poured out. And because I think the word I used in speaking about Khadija was agency. I thought a lot about her and her mother, her single mother like mine, on the 20th floor of Grenfell Tower. And I knew that she had been ringing the emergency services and expected them to come and get her in the way that working class people always expect the person in the suit or the uniform you do what they say, and they said stay put. And also I know that Khadija, I know in my heart that she, this makes me emotional, was desperate not to leave her mother behind as they ran down that flight of stairs, and was leaving it later and later and later. And lost her life. And I was thinking about agency and the ability of ordinary people sometimes to shift the system, to have the confidence to do what the inner voice is telling them to do, the power. And it was when I used that word, I think, that I got very emotional in the interview.
Nothing's changed there, has it, since then?
No, not much has changed. And actually, it's got worse because Windrush is a similar story of ordinary people. The way I sometimes put this is people like my parents who came to this country, and their children often, to give so much but take so little. And I think that those people, are constantly in the back of my head, and people like them. They're people like my constituents. And I have to say, all is not good for those folk. They're not appreciated at all, really. They're shat on. And the political establishment plays silly games and doesn't get to the heart of the matter. So I'm not sure much has changed. And this is the other difficult thing, right? So when you're a politician representing the kind of seat I am, and your inspiration is people like Martin Luther King, Mandela, you also want to be in the hope business. You want to be in the hope business, you know, and certainly when you're a Christian. And I find myself, the battle is perhaps the hope, but God, we're a long way off where we need to be.
Yeah, you want to be inspiring people.
I do. Not making them slit their wrists because they're so. But I mean, but clearly when people say to me, they say all the bloody time at the moment, "Oh, you're so passionate." The passion, it really winds me up because it's like I sort of think, well, hang on, is that really about me? How can you not be passionate about 72 people burning to death in a preventable fire? How can you not be passionate about people who paid their taxes, are British, being deported like animals, dying on the streets of Kingston unnecessarily, separated from their children? Surely that statement says far more about some of my colleagues.
Well, how can you be bored with Brexit? Is the other thing I never understand. You know, I mean, it's like this is the biggest thing that's happened in decades, and people say, well, I'm bored of it, get on with it.
Well, I've been shocked, I think, at the kind of shrug of the shoulders, it'll be all right on the night attitude to Brexit. It's fundamental. It's fundamental to who you want to be in the world and the kind of country you want this world to be, and its place in the world. It's fundamental. Serious. Will have a serious legacy for decades to come. Never mind the chaos that it's been. I mean, the only good thing to come out of it is that we have actually now had, I think, 2 years, sort of accelerated 2.5 years of discussion that we should have had for the sort of 30 or 40 years previous. We've had it in a short space of time. I do think that people now perhaps are understanding a little bit more about what the European did for us and contributed for us, whether you liked it or not.
What do you think is actually going to happen on Brexit?
I don't know. I really don't know, Christian. I think what I can say is the deal's not going to get through Parliament. There's then going to be some chaos. We might lose Theresa May as Prime Minister, which would lead to a Tory leadership race. Whoever becomes leader, gets to dictate the course, the direction. I want a people's vote. I think we're much closer to a people's vote as each week passes.
And do you think Labour will come around to supporting it?
Yes, I do. Because Labour members overwhelmingly want it. And so any Labour leader in the end has got to go there, unless you've run out of room.
Suppose we had a vote and we voted to remain, which is not a given, but it's possible. How long before we have to have another vote?
I genuinely believe that a people's vote is based on something tangible. Do you like Theresa May's deal, which is real, you can read it? Or do you want to stay in the European Union, which is real, you've experienced it? It's not based on fantasy this time. And therefore, whatever the decision, all of us have to get behind it. And that's that.
And do you think people should be offered the choice of a three-way choice, a hard Brexit, a deal and a remain, or what?
If there's a mood in Parliament for no deal, I'm happy for that to be on the ballot personally.
So we could have a three-way vote?
We could.
Why are you not talked about as a leader of the Labour Party?
I don't know, Christian. It's like asking you why you're not, I don't know. I mean, you're doing pretty well, but there are other shows that you could be presenting and you're one of the most consummate presenters in the country. That's not entirely in your gift, is it? However good you are, and I'm quite sure your parents said to you, just as mine did, you've got to be 10 times better. I can see a certain something coming into your eyes as I say that. You know exactly what I'm saying. So that is a question you'd best ask other people.
Do you think it's possible? Well, I mean, do you think Britain is ready for a black leader?
Well, I think if you'd asked me 4 or 5 years ago, I'd have said yes. I'm not sure. with the strife that's going on post the referendum,
I think we've gone backwards.
That feels quite possible. And anyway, I've slightly got past a black leader. Because it's also about how comfortable are you with your ancestry and where you're from. Because it's not just about skin tone. When I say that I'm worried that we're seeing an increased tribalism, when I speak for my constituents, yes, many of them are ethnic minorities, but not all of them are. Let me give you an example of this. When I challenged Oxford and Cambridge about who gets to go, I did freedom of information requests on race and ethnicity, yes. But I also did them on geography, why there are more kids from Barnet and Richmond going than from Leeds, Manchester, Sheffield combined, and on class, social class, whatever your background. Now, on the whole, the newspapers went with race and ethnicity because it sells papers, but I care as much about class or geography. So the point is, I'm not going to veer off speaking from a place and a tradition. I'm not going to veer off raising when Windrush comes off the fact that the Windrush descendants are the descendants of enslaved people. And that puts them in a pestle place and gives Britain a certain responsibility. When Britain goes to negotiate these trade deals, it needs to understand where the Indians might come at it because of that colonial history. And the fact that people like Boris Johnson seem to think that our history is entirely about Hitler or the Henrys and just wants to sort of squeeze out the bit in the middle. I'm not going to do that. So it's not just about your skin tone. It's about how comfortable you are in your skin with where you're from, and how do other people interpret that as meaning that you don't care about them if they're not in your ethnic group? Because I do care as much about anyone who is working class, impoverished, who has no agency, whatever they look like. But yes, of course, my constituents put me into a certain position, so I have to speak for their interests.
But do you think, I mean, you said that you changed your view on sort of speaking out about
I haven't changed my view.
Black people. You've been yourself now. Yeah. In a way that you stopped yourself from being yourself. But you are very much someone who is now seen as speaking up for Black people and scandals around immigrants and the marginalised and the poor. Can you go from that to being seen as somebody who speaks for everyone? Or do you think you end up being pigeonholed?
Who knows? Who knows? I haven't got some great scheme to become Prime Minister, so I don't give a toss. I mean, what I know is that I have to speak my truth, and I take very seriously my representational role. Now, I happen to believe that truth comes from knowing what it means to go to the fridge and there isn't enough food in it, knowing what it means to lose the electricity. That's got nothing to do with race and ethnicity. But yes, some of it's got to do with race and ethnicity. I know what it means to be a minority. I know what racism and prejudice means. But I also, that can't be the end of the conversation. Of course it can't. One has to, people have been, I'm married to a white woman. Many of my oldest friends are wonderful, wonderful white men and women. The people that have got me to this point, teachers, professors, are not Black, put it that way. So that's who I am, but what I can't do is change the context in which I'm in the world. And the context in which I'm in the world, and indeed in which you're in the world, is I am an ethnic minority in this great country. This is not America, i.e., let's not just focus on the ethnic bit, let's focus on the minority bit. So in that sense, when you are a minority, sometimes for the majority experience, it takes some bridging to get there, to understand that where you're coming from, or that you might understand certain things, or that I can't control that bit. All I can control is the bit I do, be able to sleep at night, be able to look my kids in the eye, be able to look my constituents in the eye, and not be one of those politicians. My wife's a portrait painter, so she always points this out, who start off in their careers with a straight face, like yours now, and then end up speaking out the side of their face because they're so contorted. I'm just not prepared ever to let that happen to me. And if I get close, I will leave and do something else.
So do you still feel, do you feel like an outsider? I mean, in a way...
I do a bit. Obviously I quite get off on that bit. I do a bit, yes.
But you are educated, you've got a good degree, you're a barrister, you're a member of parliament, you're about as, on paper, as much a part of the establishment as it's possible to be.
Yes, for sure.
But I bet you don't feel accepted by it, really.
I don't feel fully accepted. I don't feel fully understood. And I guess that probably some of this discussion is deeply psychological. I've never had therapy. And there are parts of my personality, believe it or not, that are quite shy, a little bit gauche, a bit uncomfortable in groups. I'm much better on a one-to-one than I am in sort of groups.
Which is odd for a politician who has to speak to...
Yeah, but there are a group of politicians who aren't great team players. I guess in the end, I'm not a great team player, maybe. I don't know. But what I can say, though, is I am hugely rewarded by what I do. It's like drinking from a hose pipe. My well-being, despite these desperate political times, is high. I'm not one of those Labour politicians, or indeed backbench Conservative politicians, who's sort of gloomy and depressed and, oh, I hate me. I don't feel like that. I actually feel quite animated and motivated politically. So clearly I must feel like I'm making a difference.
But do you want power? Do you want to take the decisions?
Yeah, I'd love to. I'd love to. I'd love to take the decisions. I'd love to be part of making real shit happen.
But you're not really prepared to make the compromises that are required for that to happen, are you? Because you don't want to be the team player. You don't want to toe the party line. You don't want to sit on the front bench for Jeremy Corbyn and say things you don't believe in.
You're jumping a bit far, because someone has to have asked me.
And would you if he asked?
Oh, come on, I'm not going to get into that, but let's be absolutely clear. Sometimes when you're a mouthy bastard, you don't get asked. Sometimes if you are prepared to tell leaders, whomever, what they don't want to hear, that call doesn't come. I'm not a yes man, and I'm not about to become one.
You're not a Corbynista either, are you?
Oh, for fuck's sake, come on, that's a silly question. I mean, I'm not a is to anything. I resent a Blairite.
You weren't a Blairite.
A Brownite. I'm David Lammy. My ancestors did not go through they went through so that I could be called a Corbynista. I'm sorry. I like Jeremy. I know him well. He's my neighbour in Holloway. But I hope I've got a bit more going on than some fan, I'm a Corbynista. Screw that. That's not me.
But how much does your politics overlap with his? How much do you agree with him?
Jeremy has, I've known him for many years, he has a deep sense of social justice. I've seen him at work in his constituency. He works bloody hard. He's popular. He cares. So quite a lot of it overlaps. And actually, our constituents, the sorts of people in his part of the world and mine, are not that different. In fact, he was a Haringey councillor before he became the MP. So quite a lot of it overlaps.
But do you agree with the mechanisms? The sort of the desire to nationalise economically, the thrust of where McDonnell and Corbyn economic policy would take us?
Broadly, I would say that I'm of the view that politics needs a big tent. on the whole if you want power, and certainly from the left if you want power. But that tent is, you know, or the bridge you build cannot be built from the centre. It has to come from somewhere. And so I quite like the fact that Jeremy knows where he stands in the ground. I thought the manifesto was really good and really exciting. There's a future story we've got to tell as well, for sure. There's a story around change, modernity, technological change, automation. We've got to get into that space. I'm not sure that looking back on the manifesto, it sufficiently did that. But in the end, is it about redistribution? And do I, in my heart, believe that England has kind of been, for the last few decades, a place that wants quality public services on the cheap? It wants to believe the idea that you can have low taxation to get those public services. I think I'm in disagreement with that assumption. And so I am up for a proper debate about redistribution. I am up for a proper debate about taxation. I'm absolutely prepared to get into discussions about what inequality really means. And actually, I'm even prepared to say that whilst I understand where the social mobility ideal comes from, I'm concerned that in the end, it's often about liberal folk in London saying we want some people to join us, not about what is actually the good life for all of us. You used to be able to be a plumber, working in a supermarket and have a good quality of life for you and your family, one holiday a year, be able to earn your own. You can't do that anymore. And therefore, it is absolutely legitimate to open that discourse up and to propose radical change. Not just say it's radical, be genuinely radical. And I do think Jeremy's prepared to get into that space in a way that Tony Blair wasn't.
Because he was always laying off. I mean...
But it was a different period, to be fair. You know, so what would Tony be like now? I have no idea.
So if miraculously you suddenly were given the power, not having quite worked out how we get to that point, but if you got it, you know, do you have a sort of, this is what I'd do? What would be the first 48 hours of a David Lammy world? You know?
Well, there's a couple of things that I'm quite keen on. I mean, obviously, you want a whole manifesto, but there are a couple of things that I'm quite keen on. The first thing is, rather than bring back grammar schools, we should be bringing back night schools right across the country. Where does a working person skill up, subsidised, supported by the state to access these jobs that others have that they can't get?
Because actually colleges have faced the biggest cuts, haven't they?
You can't go to FE college. Colleges are effectively for people under 24. They aren't for adults. And it's not subsidised or supported. That's one thing. Bring back night schools. Two, the Americans have a system where they rank students out of secondary school. It allows Harvard and Yale to say to the kid in Harlem, you might not quite have got the grades of the kid on the Upper West Side, but you're the top 2 kids in Harlem. We want you. I'd like something similar. I want to know that if you're in Sunderland or Middlesbrough or Tottenham or Tower Hamlets and you're doing so well despite the poverty, the lack of ambition, where your parents are in society or the estate you live in, you can go to those top universities and succeed. I'd also like a proper apprenticeship system. Maybe let's scrap the A-levels. No politician wants to go near it. Let's be serious about vocational. Let's follow the road that Germany went down. Let's properly devolve in this country. It can't be run from Whitehall. Every prime minister comes in saying they're going to devolve. No one ever does. They hoards it at the centre. Let's have something far more federated, far more like Germany or Canada, because actually the people of the Northeast need far more say over their lives and probably tax-raising powers to do what they want to do that's right for the Northeast. So there's a set of propositions.
Do you have I mean, all politicians sort of have a slightly mad idea as well. One that, you know, would never fly. You know, for some people it's been drugs legalization or, you know, do you have a sort of a secret wish that you know this would never get through? This would never fly because it would be such a hard sell.
Well, I'd probably be up for a different kind of positive discrimination. And when I say that, I don't just mean a positive discrimination for black and ethnic minorities. I actually mean for working class people. So I think the pendulum favours people like Boris Johnson, or young Boris Johnson, and I'd want to bend it way more towards others to get a fairer crack of the whip. So I don't know if that can fly, because I don't think it would get through Parliament.
And what's your answer to the obvious, objection to positive discrimination, which is, it's not
merit. Well, the answer is often that usually that's pushed by someone who's upper middle class, white and male, not realising that they're not there on merit. Why are they the last person to realise that the old boy network and the guy that was interviewing them simply recruited in their own image? No, I think that there are lots of working class people, and let me just absolutely underline, I'm talking about folk that are white working class in huge tracts of the country who need a much fairer crack of the whip. But I guess Britain is an old European kind of, hierarchical, class-based, elitist kind of country. And change comes hard, and it reinvents the wheel, rapidly. I actually think Brexit's in part about that. Let's just give you one conceit. When, a lot of people think that we're going to lower immigration in this country. We're not. When you go to negotiate with the Indians, what's the first thing they're going to ask of Britain, weakened Britain, in a poor negotiating position? They're going to ask for visas. And guess what? They're going to get them. And the Chinese. There will be more immigration in this post-Brexit environment, not less.
And more brown people as well.
And more brown people.
Why does that make you laugh? I know why I'm laughing.
Because it would make my dad chuckle.
David Lammy, thank you very much indeed. Thanks for sharing your ways to change the world.